My fellow Americans, tonight we gather not simply to reflect on one moment or one man, but to confront a truth about our democracy, about who we are and who we want to be. Because when political leaders speak of martyrs, when voices frame disagreement as war, and when the lines between freedom of speech and acts of violence begin to blur, we are not just having a debate. We are deciding the future of this republic. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. Very important words are not just sounds we hear and forget. They are weapons, they are medicine, they are fire, and they are fuel. In politics, words can lift a nation to greatness, or they can drag it into chaos. Words have started revolutions, ended wars, inspired freedom movements, and toppled governments. This is why leaders choose their words so carefully, or sometimes so recklessly. And in this case, when Donald Trump stood at the memorial of Charlie Kirk and called him an American martyr, he was not just speaking. He was constructing a story. He was creating a symbol. He was shaping the way millions of Americans will see Kirk for decades to come. You see, my friends, language in politics is never accidental. Every word is calculated, every phrase is crafted, and every declaration has a purpose. To call someone a martyr is not the same as calling them a leader, or a patriot, or even a hero. A hero fights battles, a patriot loves his country, but a martyr represents sacrifice. A martyr is immortal in the minds of the people. When Trump used that word, he was not just honoring Kirk. He was elevating him to a higher plane of meaning. He was saying, this man did not just live, he died for a cause. And that is the power of words. They take flesh and blood and turn it into legend. Think of history. Think of Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Just a few minutes long, but those words gave meaning to the blood spilled on the battlefield and defined democracy for generations. Think of Martin Luther King Jr. and his "I have a dream" speech. Just words spoken with courage, but they shook the conscience of a nation and opened the path to civil rights. Think even of Ronald Reagan at the Berlin Wall. "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." It was just a sentence, but it became a symbol of freedom and the fall of communism. These were not just speeches. They were turning points in history. That is how powerful words can be. Now, when Trump called Kirk a martyr, he understood this power. He was not writing a policy paper. He was not explaining a budget. He was shaping the narrative. And narrative is the true battlefield of politics today. In the age of social media, where a single clip can go viral in seconds, the right words can become immortal faster than ever before. By choosing Martyr, Trump ensured that Kirk's memory would not be quiet, would not fade into the background. Instead, it would become a rallying cry, a talking point, a story that energizes his supporters and provokes his critics. But let us also understand the double edge of this sword. Words that inspire one side can enrage the other. By framing Kirk as a martyr, Trump was not just uniting his base, he was also deepening the divide in America. Because to his opponents, this was not about honor, but about manipulation. To them, martyrdom is sacred. It belongs to soldiers, to freedom fighters, to those who laid down their lives selflessly. By using it in this political context, Trump, in their eyes, was exploiting a death to gain more influence. And this is where the true danger of words lies. The same phrase can be heard as inspiration by one group and as an insult by another. This is why we must respect the power of language. It can lift people, but it can also harden them. It can unite, but it can also divide. Think of a gym. When you pick up the weights, you have the power to build your strength. But if you lift recklessly, you can injure yourself. Words are the same. Used with care, they build nations. Used recklessly, they break them. And here is another truth: once words are spoken, they cannot be taken back. They live on in the headlines, in the recordings, in the history books. Trump's declaration of Kirk as a martyr will forever be attached to Kirk's name, no matter how people interpret it. For supporters, it is glory. For critics, it is controversy. But either way, it is unforgettable. That is why politicians fight over words more than policies, because words define legacy. So, when we look at this moment, let us not underestimate its impact. The word martyr has already done its job. It has created debate, it has drawn lines in the sand, and it has given Trump's supporters a new story to carry forward. This is the genius and also the danger of powerful language in politics. It does not just describe reality, it creates reality. Ladies and gentlemen, never forget history remembers speeches, not spreadsheets. History remembers the words that leaders chose when the world was watching. Trump's choice of words was not just about Kirk. It was about setting the tone for his movement, about framing himself as the leader of a cause so noble that even his allies are martyrs for it. That is the kind of framing that fuels loyalty and passion. And this is why the power of words in politics is unstoppable. Ladies and gentlemen, politics is not only about policies and decisions. It is about symbols. Symbols carry more weight than statistics, more influence than strategies, and more permanence than policies. A law can be repealed, A budget can be changed, but a symbol lives forever. And when Donald Trump stood at Charlie Kirk's memorial and declared him an American martyr, he was not just honoring a man, he was creating a symbol. He was carving a figure into the heart of the conservative movement that would outlast both the moment and the man. Charlie Kirk was already a powerful voice. He spoke to young conservatives, he built movements, and he represented a generation that was ready to fight for its beliefs. But in life, no matter how influential you are still human. You are still flesh and blood. What Trump did with a single word was to transform Kirk from a man into a myth. He took the raw material of Kirk's activism and elevated it into something larger, something untouchable. He created not just a memory, but a rallying point. Think about it, every movement in history has symbols. For America, the founding fathers are not just names in books. They are eternal figures of freedom. For the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King Jr. is not just a preacher. He is the dream itself, immortalized in his vision. For conservatives in America, Trump knows his base needs more than policy papers or talking points. They need heroes. They need martyrs. They need symbols that can be remembered, repeated, and revered. That is why he chose this word for Kirk. The conservative base thrives on stories of sacrifice and resilience. They believe in honoring those who stood for values, who resisted the tide, who spoke when others were silent. By calling Kirk a martyr, Trump gave his followers not just a memory to grieve, but a banner to raise. This is how symbols work. They do not just reflect reality, they reshape it. Kirk may have been a strategist, a speaker, a leader, but now he is something more. He is a symbol of conservative identity. And let me tell you something, symbols are powerful because they are simple. They are easy to understand, easy to repeat, easy to rally behind. A policy might take hours to explain, but a symbol is instant. When you hear martyr, you immediately think of sacrifice, of courage, of standing firm until the end. That one word condenses an entire narrative into a single idea. That is why symbols outlast speeches, and that is why movements depend on them. But here comes the deeper layer. Trump's base is not just an audience. It is a community bound by identity. They see themselves as fighters in a cultural war, as defenders of values under attack. In this environment, a symbol like Kirk becomes more than a tribute. It becomes a mirror. When they look at him, they see themselves. They see their struggle, their sacrifice, their willingness to stand firm in the face of criticism. In other words, Trump was not just creating a symbol of Kirk. He was creating a symbol of every conservative who feels unheard, unappreciated, or under siege. This is why the word martyr matters. It tells the base that their struggle is not just political, it is moral, it is sacred, it is worthy of ultimate honor. It takes everyday activism and elevates it to the level of destiny. And for a movement that thrives on loyalty, this is fuel. It strengthens the emotional bond between leader and follower, between base and cause. It tells them, you are part of something larger than yourself, something worth fighting for, even worth suffering for. Now, critics will argue that this is dangerous, that turning individuals into martyrs can radicalize movements, can deepen divisions, can close the door on compromise. And yes, there is truth in that. But whether you see it as inspiration or manipulation, the fact remains the creation of a symbol is one of the most powerful tools in politics. It cannot be ignored. It cannot be erased. It cannot be undone. Look at history again. Every enduring movement had its martyrs. The labor movement, the civil rights struggle, revolutions across the globe. They all elevated certain individuals into symbols of their cause. Trump, with his instinct for political theater, understands this deeply. He knows his supporters are not just following him for policies. They are following him for identity, and by declaring Kirk a martyr, he gave them one more identity marker, one more flag to wave, one more reason to stand firm against their opponents. And here is the irony: even those who oppose Trump, even those who reject this framing, are forced to acknowledge it, to debate it, to respond to it. That is the power of a symbol. It does not need universal acceptance to be effective. It simply needs to exist. Once it exists, it enters the bloodstream of political discourse, and it cannot be removed. Ladies and gentlemen, Charlie Kirk, as a symbol of conservative martyrdom, is not just about honoring his life. It is about shaping the movement's future. It is about giving the conservative base a story that strengthens their unity, fuels their passion, and defines their fight. And in this way, Trump did what every master storyteller in politics does. He turned a man into a myth and a moment into a movement. Ladies and gentlemen, let me be very clear: words can inspire, but they can also divide. Symbols can unite a movement, but they can also tear a nation apart. And when Donald Trump declared Charlie Kirk an American martyr, he was not just building loyalty, he was also walking on the edge of a knife. Because martyrdom is not a light word, it is not a casual tribute. It is a word that transforms politics into something emotional, almost religious, something dangerous when placed in the wrong hands. The edge of martyrdom is sharp because it changes the way people see conflict. When you call someone a martyr, you are no longer saying they lived and died as ordinary citizens. You are declaring that they died for a cause, that their death was meaningful, that their sacrifice demands continuation. This is powerful, but it is also perilous, because when a group believes they have martyrs, they often believe they must fight harder, resist longer, and refuse compromise. And compromise, my friends, is the foundation of democracy. Without it, democracy collapses. Think about history. Martyrs have shaped revolutions and wars. They have inspired people to rise up, to overthrow kings, to demand freedom. But they have also fueled hatred, revenge, and endless cycles of conflict. When Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, his death was seen as martyrdom for the Union, and it gave meaning to the blood spilled in the Civil War. When Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, his martyrdom carried the civil rights movement forward with unstoppable momentum. But on the other side, when political groups turn individuals into martyrs, they sometimes radicalize their followers. They create the belief that the cause is worth not just fighting for, but dying for. And that can push people from dialogue into violence. That is the dangerous edge we must never ignore. Now let us apply this to Charlie Kirk. To Trump's supporters, calling him a martyr is inspirational. It says, "Here is a man who gave everything for the cause, who represents sacrifice, who deserves loyalty even in death." But to his critics, this is something else. It is manipulation, it is exploitation, it is the weaponization of death for political gain. And this perception matters because when two groups see the same word in opposite ways, the divide grows deeper. One side feels empowered, the other feels attacked, and America, already torn apart, becomes even more fragile. This is why martyrdom is so dangerous in modern politics. It does not just honor, it polarizes. It takes a personal tragedy and transforms it into a public battlefield. Imagine a gym again. You can use a dumbbell to build strength, but if you throw it carelessly, it will hurt someone. The word martyr works the same way. It can inspire strength, or it can cause damage. The other risk is that martyrdom creates untouchable figures. Once someone is called a martyr, debate about them becomes almost impossible. Criticizing them feels disrespectful. Questioning them feels taboo. This means that Kirk, as a political figure, is no longer discussed in terms of his actions or policies. He is remembered as a symbol. And symbols are harder to challenge, harder to argue with, harder to debate. This freezes dialogue And when dialogue freezes, division solidifies. And let me remind you, division is the greatest danger to any nation. America today does not face collapse from foreign armies. It faces collapse from within, from anger, from mistrust, from the inability of its people to see each other as fellow Americans instead of enemies. Martyrdom, when politicized, does not heal this, it makes it worse. It draws a line in the sand, and it says you are either with us or against us. There is no middle ground. Critics fear that this declaration could embolden the conservative base to see themselves not just as a political group, but as a movement of sacrifice, as warriors in a holy cause. That kind of mindset is powerful, but it is also dangerous. Because when politics becomes a holy war, compromise becomes betrayal, and opponents become enemies. And when that happens, the democratic system, the very thing that allows Americans to disagree peacefully, begins to crumble. This is why Trump's statement has created so much debate. To some, it was a brilliant use of language, giving his base energy and passion. Others, it was reckless, throwing gasoline on an already burning fire. Both sides have a point, and that is exactly why the word martyr is so dangerous. It is not neutral. It is not calm. It is explosive. So, my friends, the dangerous edge of martyrdom is this: it can inspire unity within one camp, but at the cost of dividing the nation as a whole. It can energize a base, but it can also radicalize it. It can create loyalty, but it can also destroy compromise. And in a democracy where the strength of the nation depends on working together, this edge cuts deeper than any other. Charlie Kirk has now been placed on this edge, not by his own choice, but by the framing of Trump's words. And America must decide whether to walk carefully along this line or to let it become the blade that cuts deeper into its political soul. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something very important. In politics, victories come and go. Elections are won and lost, but legacy, that is eternal. Legacy is what shapes the story of a nation. Legacy is what makes people remember not just what a leader did, but what that leader stood for. And in America, legacy has always been the true measure of greatness. When Donald Trump called Charlie Kirk an American martyr, he was not simply describing the man's life. He was writing his legacy. He was ensuring that Kirk would not just be remembered as an activist or as a speaker, but as a permanent part of America's political story. Think of American history. George Washington's legacy is not just that he was the first president. It is that he was the man who defined freedom and leadership at the birth of a nation. Abraham Lincoln's legacy is not only that he ended slavery, it is that he preserved the Union. And his words and sacrifice still echo through generations. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy is not just his sermons. It is that he became the living dream of equality, immortalized in the very soul of the nation. You see, legacy transforms flesh and blood into myth, and myth into movement. Now, Trump knows this very well. By giving Kirk the label of martyr, he was securing Kirk's place in the conservative legacy. He was saying, this man is not just gone, he lives on in the cause he fought for. And this is a powerful move because legacy fuels loyalty. People do not rally for temporary policies. They rally for eternal symbols. They rally for heroes who embody values larger than life. When Kirk is remembered as a martyr, his work does not end with his death. His work does not end with his death. It continues in the hearts and minds of those who see themselves as part of his story. And this is exactly how legacies work in U.S. politics. They do not fade with time, they grow. They inspire future leaders, they shape future movements, and they create an identity that cannot be erased. When Lincoln was assassinated, his legacy as a martyr for the Union gave meaning to the Civil War and to the sacrifices made by millions. When John F. Kennedy was killed, his legacy became one of youthful energy, vision, and unfinished promise. In the same way, Trump's framing of Kirk as a martyr ensures that his name will not just vanish into history. It will become part of the larger conservative narrative, a touchstone for speeches, for rallies, for movements yet to come. But here is the key legacy is not just about honor. It is also about control. Whoever defines a person's legacy controls the story of the movement. By calling Kirk a martyr, Trump is not only honoring him, he is also shaping the memory, controlling the way millions of conservatives will see him forever. And once a legacy is defined, it is almost impossible to rewrite. That is why politicians fight so hard for words, for monuments, for memorials. Because these are the tools that cement legacy. Legacy also creates responsibility. When someone is elevated to martyrdom, their supporters feel the weight of carrying that legacy forward. It gives them motivation, but it also binds them to the cause. This can be inspiring, but it can also be dangerous. Because when people believe they are defending the legacy of a martyr, compromise feels like betrayal. Debate feels like disrespect. And in a divided America, this can turn legacy into another battlefield. Yet, despite these risks, the truth remains legacy is the glue that holds movements together. Without legacy, political energy fades quickly. With legacy, it lasts for decades. And right now, Trump has ensured that Charlie Kirk's name is written into the legacy of the conservative movement. Whether one agrees with this or not, it is undeniable that the framing has changed his place in history. Ladies and gentlemen, legacy in U.S. politics is like muscle memory in the gym. When you train, the effort may fade, but the strength remains. When a leader or activist is remembered, their individual actions may end, but the story continues to strengthen the movement. That is why legacy matters. It gives meaning to the past, power to the present, and direction to the future. So as we reflect on Trump's words, we must understand this. Charlie Kirk's legacy is no longer just about what he said or did. It is about what he represents. He is now a symbol for conservatives, a chapter in the book of America's ongoing political struggle. And legacy, once written, cannot be undone. It can only be carried forward. That is the power of legacy in U.S. politics. It does not just tell us who we were, it tells us who we will become. And today, by declaring Kirk an American martyr, Trump has added a new name to the story, a new legacy to the movement, and a new symbol to the battlefield of American identity. Ladies and gentlemen, in today's world, politics does not live in silence. It lives in the spotlight. Every word, every gesture, every phrase spoken by a leader is immediately captured, broadcast, analyzed, and amplified by the media. And when Donald Trump stood at Charlie Kirk's memorial and called him American martyr, those words did not remain in that room. They exploded across television screens, across newspapers, across social media platforms, echoing in every corner of the nation. What could have been a single moment of tribute became a national and even global conversation. Why? Because in the age of mass communication, the media is not just a messenger, it is a magnifier. Let us understand this clearly. Trump has always been a master of media. He knows how to choose words that will not just be heard, but repeated. By using the word martyr, he guaranteed coverage. Journalists could not ignore it. Commentators could not resist debating it. And social media users could not help but share it. The media thrives on controversy, and Trump provided exactly that. A word so heavy, so loaded, that it demanded attention. Within hours, it was on every headline. Trump declares Charlie Kirk an American martyr. And here lies the true power of amplification. The meaning of those words is no longer in Trump's control. Once the media picks it up, it becomes everyone's debate. Supporters rally behind it, critics attack it, analysts dissect it. Suddenly, the nation is not just talking about Kirk's memorial. It is talking about martyrdom, about legacy, about the future of the conservative movement. This is how one statement becomes a political earthquake. Think about the cycles of media. Traditional news outlets analyze Trump's choice of words, giving it legitimacy as a topic of national importance. Pundits on television argue fiercely, some calling Kirk a true patriot, others accusing Trump of exploiting tragedy. Meanwhile, on social media, the battlefield is even louder. Hashtags emerge, videos trend, and memes spread faster than wildfire. Supporters share emotional tributes, turning Kirk into a digital icon, while critics flood platforms with accusations of manipulation. And so the story multiplies, expanding beyond Trump's original words, taking on a life of its own. This is the reality of 21st century politics. Leaders know that their words are not just speeches. They are seeds planted in the soil of media. And once planted, the media grows them into trees that cannot be ignored. Trump's phrase, American martyr, was not just language. It was strategy. He threw the phrase into the media arena, knowing it would feed on it, magnify it, and carry it far beyond the walls of that memorial. But we must also see the consequences. Media amplification does not just spread words, it polarizes reactions. Supporters of Trump feel energized, validated, even vindicated. They see the media coverage as proof that Kirk's story matters, that his sacrifice is being honored, that the conservative cause is strong. For them, the amplification is fuel. It keeps the movement alive. But for critics, the same coverage feels like manipulation being rewarded. They see endless headlines about martyrdom and feel anger, frustration, and disbelief that such rhetoric is being taken seriously. This polarization is not accidental. It is built into the system. Media coverage magnifies not just the message, but the divide. Ladies and gentlemen, the media is like a microphone in a crowded stadium. It does not create the sound. It makes it louder, sometimes louder than it should be. And in politics, this loudness changes everything. Because in the noise, truth and perception blur. People no longer argue about what was said. They argue about what it means. And when meaning is up for grabs, power belongs to whoever tells the most convincing story. We have seen this many times before. When Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union the evil empire, the media amplified it into a global rallying cry. When Barack Obama said, "Yes, we can," those words echoed everywhere, shaping his campaign into a movement. And now, when Trump calls Kirk a martyr, the amplification ensures that this word will be remembered, repeated, and embedded in the political imagination of America. The danger, however, is that amplification often turns complex issues into simple, emotional sound bites. The media does not always reward nuance. It rewards drama. And what could be a thoughtful discussion about Kirk's life and legacy becomes instead a shouting match over whether he deserves the title of martyr. This shallow debate overshadows deeper questions. What did Kirk really represent? What values did he fight for? How does his life fit into the bigger picture of American democracy? These questions are drowned out by the noise of amplification. Yet, despite the risks, amplification is inevitable. In the digital age, silence is impossible. Every phrase is content. Every statement is a headline. Every memorial is a broadcast. Trump knows this better than anyone. And by giving the media a word as explosive as martyr, he ensured that Charlie Kirk's name would not simply fade into history. It would be written into the national conversation, amplified until it became a defining moment. Ladies and gentlemen, in the end, the role of the media is not just to report. It is to magnify. And when it magnifies a word like martyr, it transforms a political statement into a cultural event. The reaction becomes part of the story. The debate becomes part of the memory. And the amplification becomes part of the legacy. This is the power and also the danger of media in modern politics. It does not just tell us what happened. It tells us what to think about, what to feel about, and what to fight about. And that is why Trump's words continue to echo. Because in politics today, amplification is immortality. Ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about politics, we often think about policies, laws, and elections. But behind all of that, there is something even more powerful, something invisible yet deeply influential: the story. Politics has always been about storytelling. From the very beginning of this nation, leaders have told stories to inspire, to unite, to divide, and to mobilize. George Washington was not just a general. He became the story of honor and sacrifice. Abraham Lincoln was not just a president. He was the story of freedom and unity. Franklin Roosevelt turned the Great Depression into a story of resilience and hope. And now, in our time, Donald Trump has mastered the art of storytelling in a way that keeps America in constant debate, constant energy, constant fire. The future of politics in America will not be determined by spreadsheets or statistics alone. It will be determined by who tells the most compelling story. Trump calling Charlie Kirk an American martyr is not just about honoring one man. It is about writing a narrative for an entire movement. It is about shaping how millions of Americans see themselves, their cause, and their struggle. And whether you agree or disagree, you cannot ignore the power of that story. But here is the truth. The battle for America's future will be fought with words, with images, with symbols, more than with policies alone. Leaders know that people do not just follow plans. They follow stories they can believe in, and the more emotional, the more dramatic, the more personal the story, the more power it carries. When Trump labels Kirk a martyr, he is not simply making a statement. He is creating a myth. And myths are what movements are built on. Now, let us ask, what does the future look like if political storytelling continues in this way? On one hand, it can inspire people to stand up for their values, to fight for what they believe in, to see themselves as part of something larger than life. That is the positive side. But on the other hand, it can also polarize, exaggerate, and divide. Stories can unite, but they can also separate. They can bring hope, but they can also ignite fear. And in a country already split by ideology, the power of political storytelling is like fire. It can give warmth, or it can burn everything down. In the coming years, America will see more of this. Every political figure will try to master the art of myth making. We will hear phrases designed not for policy, but for history. We will see memorials, rallies, and speeches crafted not just to inform, but to immortalize. The digital world will only accelerate this trend. Social media will turn every story into a movement, every slogan into a battlefield, every word into a weapon. The future of politics will not just be fought in Congress or in courts. It will be fought in the arena of narrative. And so the question becomes, who will control the story? Will it be the politicians, the media, or the people themselves? Because in truth, once a story is released into the world, it no longer belongs to its creator. It belongs to the crowd. And in the crowd, it can change, it can grow, it can twist into something new. Just as Trump's words about Kirk spread across platforms and took on different meanings, the future of political storytelling will depend on how people adopt it, reshape it, and pass it along. The people are no longer just the audience. They are the co-authors of the story. We must also see that storytelling is not just about the present. It is about legacy. Every story told in politics is designed to outlive its speaker. Trump may leave the stage one day, but the story of Kirk as an American martyr will remain debated, remembered, maybe even embraced by future generations. This is how leaders secure their place in history, not just by what they do, but by how they are remembered. And the fight to control memory is the fight to control destiny. Ladies and gentlemen, America is entering a new era, an era where storytelling is the most powerful weapon in politics. Numbers can be debated, facts can be challenged, but stories are felt, and feelings are harder to erase. The politician who understands this will rise above the rest. The movement that tells the strongest story will dominate the future. The leader who can make people see themselves as heroes in a grand narrative will be unstoppable. But with great power comes great responsibility. If storytelling is used to divide, to inflame, to create endless conflict, then America risks tearing itself apart. If it is used to inspire, to unify, to remind people of their shared humanity, then storytelling can heal wounds and create progress. The choice is ours. The future is not written yet. It is waiting for the story we will choose to tell. And so I say this: the real question facing America is not just who will be president, who will pass the next law, or who will win the next election. The real question is, who will write the story that defines the next generation? Because that story will outlive us all. And in that story, every American will play a role. Ladies and gentlemen, the future of politics is not just about power. It is about the narrative. And the narrative will decide everything. So let us choose a different path. Let us choose the harder work of unity over the easy politics of division. Let us prove that America is still capable of debate without destruction, of passion without violence, of freedom without fear. That is the America our children deserve. That is the America worth fighting for. And together, I believe we can still build it.